Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to Sunday School in the Heaven Bound Sunday School class at First General Baptist Church in Truman. Our lesson, a continuation of the last, two lessons. Story of Joseph being sold into slavery in Egypt and the things that transpired. Our lesson title is Love versus Guilt. Of course, we know the guilt comes from Joseph's brothers. The love comes from Joseph, of all people, and it's a story of redemption and a story about not seeking vengeance. I think that's the world's way of looking at things. When you're wronged, you want to even things out, don't you? You want to get in there and hurt that person as bad as they hurt you. They want to do unto them as they were done unto. We'll rehash just a little bit of the last couple of lessons because that'll lead us up to what we're going to study about today. And I'm not going to go over everything, just hit the highlights, but we know that Joseph, as a teenager, 17 years old, the first story we hear about him, he was his father's favorite. We won't get into all the details of that. He had some dreams and told his brothers about the dreams and basically said, those dreams say that at one point I'm going to be over you in some capacity. A combination of the father's favoritism and this, the interpretation of the dreams left the brothers of Joseph not liking Joseph very much. And it eventually led, Joseph was put over his brothers. Out in the field, tending to the sheep. He was kind of in charge. Eventually, the brothers sold him into slavery after considering just killing him. Sold him into slavery. Joseph was taken down to Egypt, found favor with one of Pharaoh's top officials. God was blessing him during all this time. Then he was falsely accused, put in prison. In prison, he interpreted some dreams for some people that became true. The Pharaoh had a dream, very troubled. I actually had two dreams, very troubled by those dreams. He asked around, can anybody interpret them? One of the men that Joseph had interpreted their dream in prison then remembered Joseph. Joseph was brought to Pharaoh. He told Pharaoh about his dreams, interpreted them, and again we'll emphasize like I did last week, it wasn't Joseph's interpretation of the dreams, it was God's interpretation. Joseph was just the messenger. Pharaoh decided to act upon that interpretation, put someone in charge. The person he selected was Joseph. Not only put him in charge of the coming famine that was 7 years off, but he also elevated him to a position that maybe we can recognize here. We have a president of our country. We also have a vice president. Pharaoh put Joseph as high as anyone in the land of Egypt except for himself. Only the Pharaoh was higher than him. From Genesis 41, I'll tell you how far this went. It says, Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over the land of Egypt. I'll read the scripture in just a moment. Put him over the land. He began to prepare for that 7 years of famine that was going to follow 7 years of plenty. They were going to have 7 years of just a tremendous harvest. And Joseph set about, I think he said his plan was to put 20% of each year's crop in storage. Scripture will tell us they accumulated in those 7 years so much grain, they had no idea how much they had. It was like the sands of the sea. People all around, when the famine hit, Egypt was the only place that had grain. People were getting by, and it's because Joseph allotted people a certain amount. And then they started having people come from other countries seeking food. And that's where we get to our scripture, and we'll read it. It's Genesis 42, starting in verse 6. It says, Joseph was the governor over the land, and it was he that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan, to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. They said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons, we are true men, thy servants are no spies. And he said unto them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, and the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. Joseph said unto them, That it is that I spake unto you, saying, Ye are spies. Hereby ye shall be proved, by the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely ye are spies. And he put them all together into ward 3 days. And Joseph said unto them the third day, This do, and live, for I fear God. If ye be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses. But bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. And they said one to another, We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, and for he spake unto them by an interpreter. And he turned himself about from them, and wept, and returned it to them again, and communed with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. Quite different than what they did unto him. The famine all over the world, people were hungry, and that included Joseph's family back in Canaan. They were hungry. Jacob heard about the fact that Egypt had grain, and he sent his sons down there to seek some grain. I think it's notable, and it's going to come up a little bit later, but he didn't send all his sons, did he? He kept Benjamin with him. I think partly, in my mind, is that he didn't know what was going to happen or become of his sons. He didn't want to lose all of his sons at that one time. But they go to Egypt. They go in there, and Joseph is in charge, and they come to him, and verse 6 tells us, bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. Now, if you're Joseph, are you not thinking you're going to jump up and say, I told you so? I told you this was going to happen. But he didn't. And I think right there starts showing us the restraint and the influence that God has on him, that he's not going to be that. Doesn't the Bible tell us, who has vengeance? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. They didn't recognize Joseph. It's been 20 years. Last time they saw Joseph, he was 17 years old. The last time they saw him, he was hollering and crying and like, what are you doing this to me? You know, it doesn't tell us that. in the story, in the scripture about when it actually happened. But in our lesson today, when Reuben and the other brothers are talking, and they're talking about, didn't we see the anguish of his soul when he besought us? To me, that's him saying, why are you doing this to me? Don't do this. Save me. So all these things have to be going through Joseph's mind. But like I said, it's been 20 years. And he also was the second highest ranking person in the Egyptian hierarchy. So he looked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. Egyptian leaders, they all had shaven heads. They had trimmed beards. I figure all of Joseph's brothers were there, and they had the beards and the long hair, but they probably weren't well kept. But Joseph, as an Egyptian leader, had a well-kept beard. He also had eye makeup on, because Egyptian leaders, that's what they wore. And he had a real nice gown on of some kind. So I think it's understandable that the brothers wouldn't recognize Joseph. And then on top of that, what do they think happened to Joseph? They probably thought he didn't last a year. They probably thought he'd been dead for almost 20 years. So certainly not expecting to see him. So I don't think there's any confusion, the fact that they didn't know him. And plus he talked to them with an interpreter, to where he didn't want them to realize he could speak Hebrew. But it clearly tells us he saw his brothers and he knew them. But he tried to disguise his voice a little bit and act like that they didn't know him. And he started asking them questions. Why ask questions? I think he wanted to know about his brother Benjamin, since he wasn't there. And then he wanted to know about his dad. But he asked him, where'd you come from? And their story was, we're just here to buy grain. And he accuses them of being spies. Said, I know why you're here. You're spies. You're acting like you want to buy grain, but you're actually just here looking around Egypt to see how easy it could be to be attacked and come in and take over and do things. But Joseph, he had questions. He wanted to know what and where and what was going on. And so he continued to repeat those questions and make some accusations. And I think it's very significant in verse 13. The brothers finally say, wait, listen to us. We are 12 brothers. Although there's only, 10 bowing down before Joseph? But we're 12 brothers of the same man in the land of Canaan. The youngest this day is with our father, talking about Benjamin. Okay, that makes 11. Number 12, one is not. We're all the sons of one man. There's 12 of us. The youngest is with our father, and one is not. As far as they knew, Joseph had been dead for a long time, or if he was still living, in a lot worse situation than probably being dead. And Joseph again says, I think you're spies. I think you're here for an ulterior motive. Do you think Joseph, I'm sure a lot of things going through his mind, but one of the things was, are my brothers still as evil as they were 20 years ago? Are they still as treacherous as they were 20 years ago? People do change, don't they? We see that all the time. People turning their lives around. And I'm sure that's what Joseph, probably more than anything, wanted them to not be like they used to be. But he continued to, carry on the ruse of not knowing them. Finally came up with a plan of, I'm going to let you, I'm going to keep 9 of you. I'm going to send one of you back. You get your youngest brother and bring him to me, and you do that, and I'll spare your life. If you don't come back, I know you're a spy, and I was right all along, and you'll all be killed. Then he put them all together in a prison for 3 days, or in a jail. During those 3 days, I think Joseph did a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking. And as you studied this week, I'm sure you thought of this, that over the course of the 20 years, from the time his brothers sold him into slavery, he probably thought of that every day, and thought about his father, and thought about Benjamin, and then thought about his brothers that had done him so wrong. And I think human nature, or what the world would do during those 20 years, is be thinking about, if they ever cross my path again, what I can do to them to get vengeance on them, to make it even. Joseph went through a lot during those 20 years. So it's possible he might have been doing a lot of thinking about the things that were happening to him. Being a slave, being accused of molesting Potiphar's wife, being thrown into prison, and then having a tremendous responsibility put upon him and taking care of the famine. So I guess a lot of things went through his mind. One of the questions in our book says, how do you think Joseph might have felt hearing his brothers say, "One is not," knowing they were talking about him? Again, how easy would it have been when they said that for Joseph to say, "Well, I'll tell you where one is not." But, that's the world. That's how we would handle something like that. But after the 3 days, and I'm sure, we could debate this out as to why Joseph changed his mind, but after 3 days, he did change his mind. And he basically told the brothers that all but one could go back and get Benjamin. And then one would stay behind. And when he tells them this, he says, "This do and live, for I fear God." We've talked about fearing God. That's a respect of God, a reverence and awe of God. And he tells them, if you're true men, you're going to go along with this plan that I have. And so in verse 21, and they said one to another, and let me say this, I'm sure you pictured it. Joseph has told them the deal, that they can all go back except one stay. And then they bring Benjamin, and he'll know that they've been telling the truth. So, Joseph's standing here, maybe his brother's right there in front of him. And in front of him, they start talking in Hebrew, thinking Joseph and no one else can understand what they're saying. And they talk about, we're guilty. This is why this is happening to us. And then they go on to say, we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. This is why we're here, because of what we did to our brother. This is why we're here in this situation. And Joseph is hearing all that. And I love it, though, in verse 22, I was talking about, getting vengeance, or jumping up and saying, I told you so, or this or that. Well, the oldest brother, Reuben, he basically says that, doesn't he? I told y'all that we shouldn't do this. I told you, do not sin against the child, and you wouldn't hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. We did what we did. Our actions led to these consequences. It says, they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he had spake unto them by an interpreter. So he hears this, and what does Joseph do? He can't handle it anymore. He breaks down, turns away from them, so they won't see his reaction. I assume he just left the room probably, and it says he wept. Wept about what he had just heard from his brothers. Do you think over 20 years that's what Joseph wanted to hear? Their remorse? They hated that they had done that, and it come down to this. Reuben was the oldest brother. I fully think that Joseph would have kept Reuben and sent the other brothers back since Reuben was the oldest. But after hearing about Reuben trying to save him, I think that's why Simeon wound up being the one that was kept. He was the second oldest. It had to be a tremendous emotional roller coaster that Joseph has been on in his entire life, and then to have this happen and hearing what they had to say. He did keep Simeon. It says it bound him before their eyes. It says, then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, give them their money back. And by the way, he didn't tell them he was giving them their money back. He just put the money in their pouches. And then it also gave them provision for their way home. Did that to every one of them that he sent back. Don't want to mess up next week's lesson very much, but the brothers left, and on the way home they stopped to eat, making it sound like they were driving down the interstate and pulled off to stop to eat. But they're returning to Canaan, and they stopped one night and made them a fire and decided to get some of that grain out, and they discovered the money in the pouch. They became very upset about that because they didn't know what that meant. We'll talk about that next week. But having all that's happened in the last couple of weeks in our lessons, and then today's lesson, would anybody have thought Joseph was wrong to have been vindictive towards his brothers? Now, I'm not talking about God, and I'm just talking about a normal person. When they realized what Joseph had went through, wouldn't they think Joseph would be a little vindictive, want a little revenge? I mean, again, that's the world's view of things. And it would have been easy to do, right? He was the second ranking person in Egypt. Only the Pharaoh was higher than Joseph. Joseph could have had them taken out and killed. He could have had them thrown in prison. He could have put them in slavery with the worst slave master around, but he did not. He showed what? That four-letter word that we always talk about, love. He showed love toward his brothers, despite all the things that they had done to him. In our book, over on page 23, under Respond, it says, sometimes showing grace and love, even though punishment is deserved, accomplishes greater results. We are all guilty before God, yet He extended love and grace through Jesus, even though we did not deserve it. If you've been hurt by the actions of others, don't keep a list. And that refers back to focus. When you read that, it talks about keeping I think they called it a hit list of people you want to get back at. And he's saying, don't keep a list. Instead, ask God to help you show love and grace. You will find that forgiving leads to healing. Try making a forgiving list instead of a revenge list. Instead of seeking to get even, ask God to help you extend grace. It may be difficult to do, but it can bring positive results to you and to those who have hurt you. Do you need to forgive someone? And our writer says, consider doing that.